These guys never stop fighting. Hey, I am Chuck the Bureaucrat, and if you've never seen it, there is this crazy dynamic between the components of the Army, and it frequently plays out on a national scale. So if you're coming to the Pentagon, get ready for this. And just so you understand where we're going, I'm going to show you how this creates a ton of work for the hapless action officer and how they can leverage it to their own professional advantage. But first, the dog, the cat, and the rat. The Army consists of three components: the regular Army, the National Guard, and the Army Reserve. Now, the regular Army is like a Jack Russell Terrier, fit and lean, ready to go from sleeping on the couch to jumping over the coffee table and barking at the mailman. Now, the National Guard, they're like an old, fat, mean alley cat. They may not look like much, but they have been in their share of fights. They're never going to trust you, and if they feel the least bit threatened, they will hurt you. Then you got the Army Reserve. They're the rat. Scrawny and timid. They try not to attract too much attention, and they just live off the scraps that are left over. Of course, the dog and the cat, they would both love to eat the rat, but they're too busy fighting with each other to ever get around to it. Think I'm being silly? Well, I got an objective measure for this game. It is called a National Commission. These are formal groups that are stood up by Congress to provide independent advice. They might make recommendations on public policy or study some kind of problem or event, or in some cases, they're just there to commemorate a person or an event. Since 1989, there have been 150 of these things, so that works out to something like 5 a year. And while they ebb and flow, there's always a commission going on. Now, technically, there's no legal definition of a congressional commission, and sometimes they have names that don't sound like commissions, like the Amtrak Reform Council or the Technical Study Panel. But they all have 5 things in common. They're established by Congress, they're temporary, they serve in an advisory capacity, their membership is appointed in part or in whole by the members of Congress, and they report to Congress, although the reports are shared with the president and the relevant executive departments. All of this to say that when Congress gets frustrated with the executive branch, they're apt to push the National Commission button. With all that in mind, let's go back to that ceaseless wrangling between the dog, the cat, and the rat inside the Army. In 2004, Congress initiated the Commission on the National Guard and Reserves. This commission ended up recommending funding an operational reserve, resourcing common institutional training for regular Army and Reserve soldiers, and they recommended that the Chief of the National Guard Bureau get a 4th star. In total, they came out with 95 recommendations. And then, in 2013, there was the National Commission on the Future of the Army. They made recommendations about the size, modernization, stationing, and organization of Army aviation. They recommended less mandatory training and expanded funding for involuntary mobilization of reservists. This one only had 65 recommendations, but that's a lot of work. Now, it's not immediately obvious from these commissions themselves, but they grew out of the usual bureaucratic wrangling over the distribution of resources. Everybody wants more, somebody's going to get less, and if they can, that disadvantaged party is going to maneuver so that they can gain some kind of advantage. But so what? Why would this matter to some major showing up to the Pentagon for the first time? Okay, well, first of all, these commissions are not unique to the Army. Back in 2014, the Air Force had theirs, and the Navy's going through one right now. Next, these commissions grow out of systematic bad relationships. If you walk into a situation where there's a lot of parochialism and bad blood, you can accidentally take an us versus them mentality that kind of taints your ability for future relationships. Working in the bureaucracy really is all about relationships. So if there's a scuffle going on between the big guys, us little guys have to be kind of careful that we don't resort to eye gouging each other. In no time at all, we're going to find ourselves on the same side of the table, and we are going to have to work together. And then these congressional commissions can distort your perception of the normal annual cycle. A commission often generates lots and lots of work that has this one-off nature to it. But that work doesn't repeat over the short term. Maybe it'll come back in 5 to 10 years, but that tends to make it seem very unique to a major who's only going to be assigned for 3 years at the Pentagon. Of course, you can play this situation to your advantage. These kinds of commissions are generally very high visibility, and while Congress probably isn't going to notice your work, OER or resume statements highlighting the work that you've done on them, well, those can stand out. The other thing about these reports that go to Congress is they have a lot of recommendations. Each and every single one of those recommendations is going to drive somebody's workload. So understanding the recommendations can help you understand the work that follows in the next 2 to 3 years after the final report is published. And for those of you who are just wandering the halls of bureaucracy, keep one ear cocked for the rumbling of the next Congressional Commission, because trust me, it's coming. In fact, I think I know the issue that is going to touch off the next commission for the Army, but I'm curious what you think. So if you have an idea, put it in the comments.